All right, welcome everybody to another deep dive. Today we're going to be focusing on something that I think a lot of our listeners are going to be familiar with, at least to some extent, the music of the baby boomer generation.
It's a rich vein to tap, isn't it?
Yeah.
So much there.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about kind of primary sources and things that come straight from, the horse's mouth, so to speak. And I think music really captures that in a way that like almost nothing else does.
It's so direct, isn't it? That emotional impact. And it really gives you that visceral sense of what it was actually like to live through those times.
Yeah, and people talk about, the baby boomer generation and that post-World War II period and all of that. It can feel a bit like a history lesson.
A bit dry at times.
Yeah, exactly. So
Mm.
what we're going to be doing in this deep dive is actually kind of plugging into the powerful current of this generation.
Yeah.
You know, the music that really electrified the baby boomers. And to be honest, it still resonates with us today.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what we're going to try and get across in this deep dive is that this music wasn't just background noise.
Yeah.
It was a genuine catalyst for change.
For huge social and cultural shifts.
Exactly. And I think that's why it's so relevant for us to explore. It's not just nostalgia. It's about understanding a really pivotal era through its soundtrack.
Absolutely. And it's a pretty broad soundtrack, too. I mean, we're talking 1950s right through the 1970s. That's a lot of ground to cover.
A period just bursting with transformation.
Oh, yeah. And I think it really begs the question, have you ever really considered, like really stopped to think about how much music can actually shape a generation's beliefs and actions? I mean, it can do more than just reflect how you feel. It can actually make you feel that way, too.
It's a compelling thought, isn't it? And I think when we look at the baby boomer generation, history gives us a pretty emphatic answer to that question. I mean, this generation coming out of the post-war world, they stepped into a world that was just ripe for change, and music became their voice.
Their megaphone almost.
Yeah.
And, we talk about that voice and where it all began. It all kind of kicks off, doesn't it, with rock and roll. It was like the first seismic wave of this whole musical revolution.
It really was. It was this incredible fusion of rhythm and blues and country and gospel. It just tapped into this youthful energy and this desire for something new.
Something different.
Yeah. And, if you had to pick one figure who embodies that energy, it's got to be Elvis Presley. He wasn't just a musician. He was this symbol of rebellion, this harbinger of change.
I mean, even his dance moves were considered pretty provocative back then.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, can you imagine the shock waves that sent through conservative America? It was a huge cultural moment.
Totally. And then the 60s hit, and oh boy, things really start to, bubble over with the arrival of groups like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones.
Oh, yeah. We entered this whole new phase of musical experimentation. The rebellion takes on this artistic edge.
And this really resonated with a generation, a younger generation, who felt increasingly disenchanted with the world around them. They were questioning those traditional norms, looking for something real, something authentic.
Exactly. And they found it in this music. This music spoke to them, validated their feelings, and gave them a sense of belonging.
It's like it gave them permission to feel the way they were feeling.
Absolutely. It normalized their experience.
Okay, so let's zoom in on some of these key players. The Beatles, their impact, it's almost impossible to quantify. I mean, they're still so relevant today.
Oh, they are. They're the architects of modern pop music. Their songs, undeniably catchy, but there's this underlying sophistication there, a real innovation in their songwriting and recording.
And it wasn't just music. It was fashion. It was culture. It was even politics.
Exactly. They became this global phenomenon, this force for positive change.
I mean, John Lennon's that's a song that still moves people today. And then you've got Paul McCartney's Gift for Melody. There's a reason those tunes are timeless.
And their message, it was about hope, about shared humanity, which really resonated at a time of so much social and political turmoil. But it wasn't all peace and love,
Yeah.
You have the other side of that coin with the Rolling Stones.
Oh, yeah, the bad boys of rock. They offered a much grittier, a more blues-infused sound. A bit of an edge to them.
Exactly. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, they embodied that rebellious spirit. They lived it.
The music felt raw, unfiltered.
It captured the angst of a generation. They weren't afraid to delve into some darker themes, to explore the complexities of life.
So they presented this alternative, this counterpoint to the Beatles, which I think really appealed to a certain segment of that generation.
Absolutely. They weren't afraid to challenge the status quo, to provoke a reaction.
And then you have, I mean, how can you talk about this era without talking about Bob Dylan? the poet laureate of the 60s.
His lyrics were so powerful, they were anthems for a generation demanding change. They weren't just words, they were calls to action.
Absolutely. I mean, Blowing in the Wind, The Times They Were Changing, these songs were sung at protests, in rallies. They embodied the spirit of the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement.
They gave voice to the voiceless. They articulated this deep yearning for a more just world.
Okay, but we got to remember, the music of this era, it wasn't just rock and roll, it was a whole spectrum of sounds.
Right. It was a tapestry of genres. We saw a resurgence of folk music.
Absolutely. Artists like Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, they kept that tradition alive.
And they used it as a platform for social commentary. Their songs often directly addressed issues like poverty, war, inequality.
And then you have Motown, which brought these soulful sounds into the mainstream. I mean, Motown was more than just a record label. It was like a cultural force.
It was. Barry Gordy Jr., the founder, he had this vision. He wanted to create music that would appeal to everyone. Black, white, it didn't matter.
And he did just that. I mean, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, Smokey Robinson, these artists created music that transcended racial boundaries.
They spoke to the human experience. Their songs were about love, loss, hope, struggle, themes that everyone could relate to.
And then, of course, you can't talk about the 60s without mentioning the Psychedelic Revolution.
Oh, yeah, the late 60s, early 70s, that's when things got really interesting. The music became more experimental. It reflected this growing counterculture movement.
Right. Bands like the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, Jimi Hendrix, they were pushing the boundaries of what music could be.
And their concerts, they were more than just performances. They were like these communal gatherings, these celebrations of freedom and self-expression.
It was a time of huge social and cultural upheaval, and the music reflected that.
Exactly. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's so clear that the music of the baby boomer generation, it was more than just entertainment.
Yeah, it was a soundtrack to a revolution.
Mm-hmm.
It was a force for change.
It reflected the hopes and dreams and fears of a generation, and it continues to influence music today.
It's a legacy that lives on. And you know what I always find fascinating? Those little quirky details that you stumble across.
Oh, yeah, the trivia. I love that stuff.
Well, in doing the research for this episode, one of the things that just totally blew my mind is that S.G. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles was actually one of the first concept albums, like ever.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, up until that point, albums were just collections of singles. But S.G. Pepper was different. It was a cohesive piece of art, a story told through music.
That's so cool. I never thought about it that way. It really changed the way we listen to music.
Absolutely. It redefined the album as an art form. And another little tidbit that I found fascinating was Bob Dylan's performance at the Newport Folk Festival in 1965.
Oh, yeah, when he went electric.
Exactly. And the folk purists were outraged. They booed him off the stage.
I mean, they saw it as this betrayal of the folk
It
tradition.
was a huge controversy.
Yeah.
But it also speaks to the power of music and how deeply people connected with it.
It really does, and I think that's a good note to end on.
Yeah.
This music, it wasn't just background noise. It was a vital part of people's lives. It shaped their worldview. It gave them a sense of purpose.
It was the soundtrack to their lives. And I think it's important for us to remember that because music still has that power today.
It absolutely does.
So, as you're listening to your favorite music, think about the stories behind it, the people who created it, the times they lived in, and how that music continues to shape our world today. It's a fascinating journey, and one that's well worth taking.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.